And now, a big round of applause for our next speaker, Scott Horton, communicator and educator on foreign policy and the importance of the anti-war movement for the cause of liberty. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for Scott. And Scott is also a very kind fellow. He's been waiting very patiently. And he is the head of the Libertarian Institute. He also has his own radio show, the Scott Horton Show. It used to be anti-war radio, but I guess we can still call it that. So you go to Libertarian Institute or the Scott Horton Show, either place you can find Scott's interviews. They're fantastic. There's so much to talk about. So Scott, welcome to our meeting on a virtual basis. And please tell us about what happened this weekend where you spoke, and then take it in any direction you would like to at that point.
Okay, sure. Well, thanks very much, Dennis. I appreciate your very kind introduction. And to everybody, hi. I hope you're having a good time. I hope I don't ruin it too much with the bad news here.
They're all saying hello.
Hi. Hi.
Just try to catch you up on some of the wars, I guess. So I guess, where would you like me to start? I guess I could say Donald Trump has escalated all of the wars that he inherited from Barack Obama. And then there's also Korea and Iran. So you guys, I guess, ask questions, tell me where to go, what you want me to address, and I'll try to catch you up on it.
Okay, well, Scott, why don't we start with, how about with Korea? There appears to be perhaps some positive things happening regarding that. Your thoughts, please.
Yeah, well, I don't know if they really coordinated this. It may be that they did, but the Americans certainly played the role of bad cop in, leaking what seemed to be pretty credible threats of an attack on North Korea to newspapers like the Wall Street Journal and places like that, while at the same time, the South Koreans, and I don't really think it was coordinated, I think the South Koreans really kind of took the initiative to head conflict off and work hard and use the Olympics as an opening to open up new negotiations with the North. And the North Koreans have actually said a few times, although the newspapers have always played this down, but this time it's pretty much, undeniable. It's part of the narrative that they have offered to negotiate even their possession of nuclear weapons, which is unheard of, right? The only country that ever gave up nuclear weapons, it wasn't under foreign pressure at all. It was South Africa that did it when the white government was on their way out after apartheid. They went ahead and dismantled their nukes rather than turning them over to the new regime. But for a country to give in to pressure or even to carrots and offers to give up their nuclear weapons in a situation like this is pretty much unheard of. And I'm not saying we should take them at their word, but we should absolutely take them at their word that there is an opening for negotiation here. The Trump administration has sounded like Dick Cheney and George Bush saying, we won't even talk to you until you agree to all of our terms first, and that you have to agree to give up even your possession of nuclear weapons for us to even think you're good enough to meet with and talk to, which is just crazy and completely counterproductive. And so it seems like the South Koreans have decided that they're going to step up and go ahead and take the opportunity to try to intervene here and ratchet tensions down. So so what are the North Koreans' demands? The North Koreans' demands are not to be put on American welfare dole payments from now on or anything like that. They just want a promise that we won't attack them. They want us to stop practicing invading their country, which our side runs full-scale drills twice a year about what it would be like to invade North Korea. And we constantly fly B-1 bombers over the DMZ, which are actually not nuclear equipped, but they very well could be, and the threat is not so subtle. And this is not just Donald Trump. Barack Obama, Donald Trump rightly was criticized for saying, if it came down to it, we would obliterate North Korea. Well, Barack Obama had used very similar language. Nobody ever held him accountable for it in any way. But he also had said, look, in the event of a war with North Korea, we would utterly destroy, or words very close to that. And this is a country, and Americans, I know it's hard to understand this, and I'm guilty of this too. I was raised on MASH. That's all I ever knew about the war in Korea was Hawkeye and BJ Honeycutt and Radar O'Reilly and Klinger and, you know, War is Hell and whatever, but mostly it's a sitcom. But in fact, you know, America killed approximately 2 million Koreans in that war. They napalmed the entire north of that country to the ground, killed them all. And, you know, even the American commanders like MacArthur expressed disgust at their own handiwork, at what they were doing, just decimating the civilian population of the North. The United States of America, we just have no comparison to that. That one time that millions of Californians were wiped out by the Japanese, right? That never happened to us. But those are the eyes that they're looking out of. That is the level of violence that America has actually brought to them just within living memory of those who survived. So, and, you know, we still don't have a peace deal, right? We still have only a ceasefire from the end of the Korean War. No real armistice or peace. And we absolutely could have that. And I'm here to tell you, and I know that this is true because I've talked to him about it 100 times. If Ron Paul was the president, he would have just told the North Koreans, we're lifting the sanctions, we're dropping the threats, we promise not to attack you, we sure would like some concessions too, but we're treating you like a normal country. That's it. No carrots or sticks. Just, you want to trade? Let's trade. And that's it. And the threat of war would be over. And Ron Paul said over and over again, he wrote an article like this just the other day, say we should pull all of our troops out of Korea right now. The only reason they're there is as a tripwire so that they will all get slaughtered. You know, 30,000 something soldiers, lives at risk, and their families too, in Seoul, and they will all die. And that's just to make sure that America won't back down, because we'll have already shed so much blood that we'll have to double down and fight the war through to the end. That's why they're there, to basically blackmail the American population in the event of a war, that we definitely have to make it worse. And it doesn't have to be this way at all. I mean, and so Donald Trump could just say, hey, South Korea, whatever you want to do to make peace, we're with you, we support you, let's do this, and we could absolutely avoid conflict here. And I think, hey, there's a chance.
Right. Well, Scott, that's a very interesting point, because the director of national intelligence, Coates, Daniel Coates, I think is a former Republican senator from Indiana, he said Kim Jong-un, as horrible as that regime is actually acting logically and rationally on this nuclear thing, because he sees what's happened in Iraq, in Libya, and what they're trying to pull off in Syria. And so he's saying, hey, this is for our own self-preservation, as you were suggesting. So if we take away that rationale for them, then that would seem to make it better. But it's, as you say, it's maybe because the South Koreans want to have a more peaceful situation on their peninsula, maybe that's going to cut the Gordian knot, and things will get better. And of course, you saw that Dr. Winchester, from the MASH show, just died. But what you just said now reminded me of something else. Ben Swann just put out a piece, I think, yesterday, and you're talking about Obama and no accountability. And Ben Swann talked about Libya. I don't know if you've seen this video yet, but he's talking about, the slave markets in Libya and what would happen there. And of course, as you recall, Obama got the United States involved, helping the NATO powers that wanted to overthrow Gaddafi. He took off for Brazil on a junket and told Congress, well, don't worry about it. I'll let you know about it when I get back from Brazil. It's not really a war because they can't shoot back at us. Of course, a lot of problems with that. But your thoughts on Libya, what's happened there, the horrors of it, and is there any positive step that can be taken now, or other than just the United States government should just not have anything to do with it and not put us at further risk and have further cost? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, thanks for bringing that up, Dennis. I mean, this is such an important one, but we have, 7 or 8 wars to juggle through here. So it's already a question of which wars are we going to not have time to even mention tonight, right? So I'm glad that Libya is at the top of your agenda, because I mean, look at it like this. At the moment that Barack Obama was sending the Navy SEALs to kill Osama bin Laden, hiding in his attic up there in Pakistan in the spring of 2011, at that very moment, he was taking bin Laden's side in Libya. So remember, Al-Qaeda comes from the Arabs who had traveled to Afghanistan with the CIA and Saudi Arabia and Pakistan helping them do it in the 1980s to fight against the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan there. And when they came home, they became Al-Qaeda and they started attacking the United States, right? Well, so then after Bush invaded Iraq, a lot of these guys and a lot of new ones went and traveled to Iraq, and they fought in what was called Al-Qaeda in Iraq under Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. And this is the group that later became the Islamic State, right? But in Iraq War II, they were called Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and they were the worst part of the Sunni-based insurgency fighting against our soldiers there. Well, so after Iraq War II was over, a lot of them went home to where they were from, just like had happened in the previous generation. And in this case, they came home to Libya. And their groups were called Ansar al-Sharia and the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group. And right when Obama should have had no other foreign policy priority than limiting battle spaces where Al-Qaeda type radical Sunni groups, and especially ones that are deliberately and explicitly declared loyal to Osama bin Laden's group, that keeping that from happening, keeping those battle spaces at the minimum, not repeating the mistake of Iraq War II, where they turned the entire west of the country into this lawless Sunni jihadistan, where it used to be under Saddam Hussein's lock and key. They turned it over to a bunch of crazies. So Barack Obama had one mandate: to not do that again. And in fact, that was why he was elected, because he was the one who said that Iraq War II was stupid. We should have never done it. That was how he beat Hillary Clinton, and that was how he beat John McCain in 2008. And then he turned around and did the same thing again in Libya. And he got rid of the wacky Colonel Gaddafi, just like with the North Koreans. It's not that Gaddafi was a good guy. The North Korean government, I didn't mention there, is the worst totalitarian government on the planet. It's an absolute garrison state. 2/3 of the population is in the army. It's unreal, right? But that doesn't mean that they're crazy. That just means that they live in a totalitarian state. That doesn't mean we can't negotiate with them. No one should have to be a good person. You negotiate with your adversaries. That's the point, right? Well, Gaddafi, remember Ronald Reagan had bombed him, and George Bush Sr. and Bill Clinton had given him the cold shoulder, but George W. Bush brought him in from the cold. Remember in 2003, they needed to say that Iraq War II had accomplished something, so they claimed that it had scared Gaddafi into giving up his weapons of mass destruction, when really he just had old crates of centrifuge parts he'd never even put together. But anyway, that was the fig leaf for the exchange for him to come in and have open relations with America again. And then, of course, what did that mean in the Bush years? That meant he cooperated with the CIA's rendition and torture program. And they would send him these kidnapped Libyan Islamist fighters that they would capture in Iraq War II, and they would send them to him to hold in prison and torture them himself and do what he wanted with them. And so Gaddafi was a cooperating partner. And I'm not saying that that should have been. America shouldn't have had a relationship with him one way or the other. They shouldn't have been attacking him, and they shouldn't have been supporting him and hiring him to torture people for us either. Both of those things were wrong. But it goes to show that it was just a few years later, it was less than a decade later, it was 8 years later, that Barack Obama turned around and stabbed him in the back. And here's Gaddafi was basically a socialist. He shaved his chin every morning. He was his own god that he worshipped. He was no Islamist bin Ladenite radical trying to take on the United States. He was no enemy of the United States at all. And so how did they even lie us into that war in 2011? They claimed that Gaddafi swore that he was going to murder every man, woman, and child in Benghazi. And it was the most ridiculous hoax when he had never said any such thing. His forces had already taken a bunch of towns from the rebels who had risen up, and they hadn't massacred any civilians at all. The thing was the most ridiculous hoax on the level of Saddam Hussein's nuclear weapons program. A total, completely transparent lie. They even said that Gaddafi was giving Viagra to his armies so that it could just rape every woman they found as they conquered the country that they already ruled. The whole thing was a complete farce. And on that basis, and here's the point, like you said, it turned into a total disaster. And Libya is now split in at least 3 pieces. There are 3 different governments that claim authority over the whole country when none of them actually exercise it, but they periodically fight with each other. For a while, a group declaring themselves loyal to the Islamic State seized an entire town called Sirte. You had these Al-Qaeda guys are actually a lot like Nazis. They rolled in and they started rounding up all the blacks, and in fact, they purged cleansed, as they call it, an entire town of blacks called Tawerga, because even though these are just poor laborers from southern Africa who had traveled up there to fight, the accusation was that they were all mercenaries that worked for Gaddafi. And during the war, I interviewed a reporter who was reporting, who had been at a refugee camp where the Al-Qaeda fighters would come in the night and rape all the women hiding in the refugee camp at gunpoint. And those were real mass rapes that were happening in that war, and they were happening at the hands of America's backed and Saudi-backed jihadis there. And that was whose side Obama took in that fight. And I want to emphasize, it's not because he's a secret Muslim-born in Kenya terrorist agent. It's because basically he's Bill Clinton. He's Ronald Reagan. He's a center-right, center-left, CIA guy. And that's what America does. We back terrorists against states that we want to overthrow. And again, you might be asking, yeah, but what was really the point then if he wasn't going to massacre the people, and if George Bush had brought him in from the cold? And the true answer, I really believe, and I hate this answer because I don't think it's good enough, but the answer is it was a publicity stunt. Because after the revolution in Egypt, it was too obvious that America backed every dictator in the region. And Hillary Clinton and Samantha Power and Anne Marie Slaughter and all of these women in the Barack Obama administration and in their think tanks, they literally said, and I have the direct quotes, that this is going to change our image. We're taking a real bad rap because everybody knows we've backed the Mubarak dictatorship in Egypt for 30 years. And the entire population of Egypt just rose up to overthrow him. And the consensus was so solid that the military told him he had to go rather than clear the square with violence. And they succeeded in overthrowing their government. And so to make it look like America is Superman, we take the side of the underdog. Remember that time we saved France from the Nazis? Yeah, that's us. And to at least muddy the water about the fact that America backed every single king and sultan and emir and dictator and El Presidente from Morocco to Pakistan, excluding Syria and Iran. But every other one of those countries is a tyranny and is backed by the United States of America. And so they basically used Gaddafi as a stunt, that they would betray him and say, see, we're on the side of the rebels against the dictator. And then, sorry, but then Hillary called it her bank shot, right? Like it was pool. She's just playing pool with these humans' lives. Her bank shot was, we'll take all of the jihadist terrorists from the Libya uprising and we will send them on to Syria to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. And not because they care about the people of Syria who live under his tyranny, but because that would help weaken Iran. And since Iraq War II had empowered Iran by putting their allies in power in Baghdad, they figured, well, we can't start Iraq War II all over again and force the Shia out. So as a consolation prize, we can bring Assad down a peg in Syria. And that caused a war that led to the rise of the Islamic State and the deaths of at least 500,000 people since then, and the entire refugee crisis and the rest of it.
Right. And General Flynn testified to that, right? Saying that they knew a Salafist group, which is the descriptor for groups like ISIS. They didn't have the name yet, but he said a Salafist group was rising up in Syria, and he said these people were fine with it because it was going to help them to overthrow the Assad government. And then getting back to the Libya thing, now this Seymour Hersh, with his great reporting, talked about the rat line. So this ties into Benghazi, and the real significance of Benghazi, as I understand it was part of the rat line to get weapons from Libya to the multinational coalition of regime change, war of aggression proxies.
So let's talk about that for a second, okay, Dennis. So Richard Nixon, everybody, Richard Nixon called this a modified limited hangout. And what it means is he and Haldeman and Ehrlichman, that was their thing, a modified limited hangout. And what it means is you give people a scandal, but it's really only half the truth. If they knew the real scandal, you might get in real trouble. So you give them something to be really upset about that's in intents and purposes a red herring. So in the case of the Benghazi scandal, what's the red herring? The limited hangout is that these men didn't have good enough security. They were surrounded by dangerous men who attacked them, but they didn't have the means to defend themselves. And then that Obama and Hillary Clinton did not send forces to their aid quickly enough. And in fact, maybe even deliberately told people to wait rather than rush in there, right? Like it was the Parkland shooting or something. So that was true, right? As much as if you want to complain about that, but it's beside the point, because the real point is what you're talking about. What was Ambassador Stevens doing in Benghazi? Why was he there? Why was there a CIA safe house a few blocks away? What was going on? It was, as you say, the rat line, taking these jihadists who just fought in the war against Gaddafi and sending them on to Syria with all these guns. And so now, again, America's on the side of our enemies, those sworn loyal to Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri, the butchers of New York City. But just because, and just like in the Bill Clinton years, just because our government supports them doesn't mean that they love us. It doesn't mean that they've been bought off. Bill Clinton supported al-Qaeda in their wars in Bosnia and in Chechnya and in Kosovo in the 1990s. A lot of good that did in bribing them off into not wanting to do the September 11th attack, right? We were still supporting Israel and still bombing Iraq from bases in Saudi, and that was why they were attacking us. And supporting them in Kosovo wasn't enough to bribe them or buy them off. Same thing here. Barack Obama's forces are supporting the al-Qaeda guys in Libya, sending them on to fight in Syria. And then, and this is actually an interesting story, right? I like this. In a, you know, it's a vignette. It could be a chapter in a book. So what happened was Barack Obama killed an al-Qaeda guy with a drone. The CIA killed an al-Qaeda guy with a drone in Pakistan. His name was Sheikh Yahya al-Libi. And interestingly, and I have to bring it up, his brother had been tortured by the CIA into falsely claiming that Saddam had taught al-Qaeda how to hijack planes and make chemical weapons. And this was a guy that was later rendered to Gaddafi, who Gaddafi then murdered in his prison cell and called it a suicide, Arkansas style, right? Well, then Obama kills his brother with a drone in Pakistan, and Ayman al-Zawahiri, this is in July of 2012. So Ayman al-Zawahiri put out a podcast. And can you hear me?
Yes.
Does it work?
Yes.
Okay, so the al-Qaeda, the leader of al-Qaeda after bin Laden was killed, the guy that took over al-Qaeda after bin Laden was killed, Zawahiri, put out a podcast saying, hey, Libyans, you know, I know you're working with the Americans there. How about this September 11th to mark the death, you know, to get revenge for Sheikh Yahya al-Libi's murder in Pakistan, or, you know, death by drone in Pakistan. You guys do something to the Americans there in Benghazi. He specifically said that. And I hate to give credit to Rachel Maddow, but she was the one who nailed this story before she changed her story to fit with the Barack Obama narrative about what had happened there. But that was exactly what had happened, was America had allied with the al-Qaeda terrorists who had fought our guys in Iraq War II, and were using them against Gaddafi, and we're in the middle of using them against Assad in Syria. And then, but what happens when you station your ambassador right in the center of a hornet's nest? Then he gets stung. And it was as simple as that. And so what they did was they said there was a stand-down order. Remember, all right-wing talk radio and everything, a stand-down order. And Obama refused to go and save the heroic men there, which is enough to get you really upset from what were they even really doing there in the first place? What was this covert operation? After all, the capital of Libya is in Tripoli. Why would there be a consulate in Benghazi? You know, it's because that's where the jihadis were. And that was where they were doing business with them. Not fighting against them, doing business with them, giving them travel plans. And by the way, everybody, do you remember in 2013 when Barack Obama was going to bomb Syria? And what happened was the American right opposed it. All of talk radio opposed it. And I think credit goes to Breitbart. And they're actually doing really good work on Yemen right now for this. But Breitbart, and then I guess Drudge too, I'm not really sure, had basically said, this is wrong. If we attack Assad, we are in effect helping al-Qaeda. And that's who's on the other side of this war. It doesn't mean we like Assad. But why would we take the side of al-Qaeda in a war in Syria. And you even had GIs would hold up a cardboard sign and do little YouTube videos and pictures, and they would hold a sign that says, "I didn't join the Marine Corps to fight for Al-Qaeda in Syria." And it was, I guess, unanimous on AM talk radio, and it was virtually unanimous. It was Newsmax.com, a very right-wing site, Newsmax.com, that kept the running tabs on the congressman and the ratio of calls. And, you know, even though it was Barack Obama's war, liberals and left-wingers, they don't really like war. I mean, they will try to look the other way if Barack Obama wants to have one, but they're not really bad war supporters. If anybody's going to support the war, it's going to be the American right. But in this case, the American right got it right, that this would be a war against a secular dictator, another secular dictator who shaves his chin every morning in favor, like Saddam and like Gaddafi, in favor of a bunch of suicide bombing, head chopping lunatics. Why in the world would we do that? Now, so from the point of view of a Marine, that's pretty simple, cut and dry, right? That's crazy. I don't want to go. I don't want to participate in this. But so you have to ask from the point of view of the establishment. Why would the American establishment want to do it? Why would Barack Obama want to do it? And that is because they hate Iran, even though Iran never really did anything to us, except open up the presents that we continue to give them and exploit the policy blunders that the American warlords continue to implement in their region. I mean, and Iraq War II, of course, is the ultimate example of that, where it was a mixed city. It's not just that we put a Shiite government in power. The U.S. Army and Marines helped the Shiite militias cleanse, as they call it, the city of Sunni Arabs. So that Baghdad is now a 85 or 90% Shiite city and will forever be the seat of a Shiite-ruled government there, which is a major change. I'm not saying in and of itself I care either way who rules Baghdad, but I'm saying in making that change, that incredible change, Bush has, you know, knocked over just thousands of dominoes. They're going to keep falling down. And then as the Americans attempt, as the Obama regime at least, attempted to pick up the pieces, all they did was just make matters absolutely worse. When their policy in supporting these jihadis in Syria ended up creating the Islamic State, well, that was a bridge too far, right? The Islamic State conquered all of Western Iraq too. So they couldn't have that. So then they had to start Iraq War III and start the war on behalf of the Shia against the Sunnis all over again to roust the Islamic State out of Western Iraq. That took 3 years, from 2014 through last fall. And another however many hundreds of thousands of people have died in this catastrophe. And so now Trump comes in basically at the end of Iraq War III, and his guys, Trump seems to say sometimes, hey, look, we're only in Syria to fight ISIS, and that's it. But then Rex Tillerson, not just Mattis, his Secretary of Defense, but Tillerson, the Secretary of State, basically says, don't pay any attention to the president. That's not true. We're there to support the Kurds, to support their enemies, the Turks, and to limit the power and influence of Iran, who are, of course, only here in reaction to what we have done supporting these Sunni jihadist terrorists against the state there. And so they act like none of this is their fault. None of this is the result of any of the things that they've done. And history just began yesterday. And now, guess what? Did you hear? Iran has more power and influence in Syria now than before. So we have to do something about that.
Right. So it's like an enemy's creation industrial complex, and it's a perpetual motion machine for the war party and the welfare warfare state. I got more to ask, but I just want to go on record because this is being recorded. I'm with 100%, with maybe one exception here about the thing about the liberals and the left not being so bad on the wars. And I think, but as you correctly pointed out about Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Roosevelt, and then even thinking later, I'm not so sure about that. But getting back to the part about 2013,
I didn't mean the Democrats. I wasn't saying the Democrats. I was talking about right wingers. Okay. The populist population of the country who were opposed to the war and were calling into their congressmen and stuff like that.
Okay.
But no, the Democratic Party, of course, has shed as much blood as Mao Zedong. Get real.
You're right. Okay, I'll do my best. But to share with you just a quick story. Actually, at that time, we did hear in our local congressional district Republican committee, and I think even at the county Republican committee, we passed resolutions opposing any war against Syria and any undeclared wars. Now, a lot of good that's done since then, but at least there was, and I think you pointed this out, there were people, and including the right, but also a lot of military people, who rose up and said, this is ridiculous. And so that one time we stopped it, and yet, of course, with the passage of time, the people in power said, well, maybe they'll all forget about that. And so they go in anyway, by hook or by crook. Oh, no boots on the ground. And then we turn around several years later, and we see what has happened. And that reminds me, I didn't bring up this name earlier, but probably should have, because one central figure, at least in terms of communicating the pro-war propaganda, Lindsey Graham, who, in fact, there's that one picture. I thought they were in Libya. Him and Rubio and McCain. I thought it was from Libya, but also his role in all of this, and of course McCain going to Syria and meeting with the jihadists, and then Graham. A couple of things come to mind here. The thing about what he said about Korea, it might be worth it, echoing Madeleine Albright, but then also the point that you made, Scott, about how what's happening is the United States government in all of these machinations ends up fighting forces and people that were their partners in the alleged global war on terror. And let's not forget that Lindsey Graham was the one who infamously stood up on the floor of the United States Senate and said, well, if you're involved in violating Section 1021 of the 2012 NDAA, shut up. You don't get a lawyer. And so you look at Lindsey Graham, you look at John McCain, you look at all these legislators in both houses of Congress, all these people in the executive departments, and saying, well, wait a minute. You never defined what substantial support was and who the associated groups were. But through their policies, and this is continuing, they are most definitely giving substantial aid and support to either Al-Qaeda, which in some cases, yes, but also groups that are very closely allied with them. There's no Guantanamo for them. And then Lindsey Graham has the guts to come out and say, and well-timed for your conference that you were just at, that he wants to increase the $38 billion raping of the American taxpayer for the benefit of a foreign political state, which has got is up to its neck in the effort to atomize the Arab world, including waging war against the people of Syria. So how does Lindsey Graham keep skating through all of this? Scott, would you please tell us?
Yeah.
You see, we have a very distinguished audience, by the way, real quickly. In fact, the great Karen DeCoster Campbell is here, and we have many distinguished folks, very knowledgeable, and they were applauding my oration. So your thoughts, sir.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. No, listen, Lindsey Graham, too, he and Joe Lieberman and John McCain, in the years when they were still getting along with Gaddafi, they were over there trying to sell him weapons, trying to sell him armored personnel carriers and all this stuff. And then when he didn't go along with them, they turned right around and they were the cheerleaders. They led the parade for that attack in 2011 and, did everything they could, just as they had done to pressure Obama into escalating the war in Afghanistan far beyond what he already was going to do anyway. And so, yeah, and listen, if you went back and took a stock of what Lindsey Graham or, John McCain, his clone, what these two have said about, and used to be Joe Lieberman was the third amigo there, what they have said was going to happen as a result of us listening to them and launching the wars they wanted to launch. And you compare that to the results. I mean, it's really something. And it's no mystery why. I mean, if you listen to John McCain, and he's on the Armed Services Committee, he clearly has no idea what he's talking about. I mean, you guys might remember there's a famous clip of John McCain in Iraq. He had traveled to Iraq to do a PR stunt there, and he was accusing Iran of backing Al-Qaeda. And Joe Lieberman had to take him aside and say, no, well, it's groups, it's militant groups, because of course Iran was backing the Shiite militias that were at war with Al-Qaeda, the same Shiite militias that America was backing in their war against Al-Qaeda in Iraq. We were on the same side in that war, by and large, if not in the specifics, right? And so here John McCain, he didn't even have his talking point straight at all. He didn't even know which way was east and which way was west and who was on whose side at all. And this is the guy who, in fact, go back to the record. Right after September 11th, he was one of the very first people who said we have to attack Iraq next. It was a race between him and Bill Kristol and William Safire and a couple others. He went on the David Letterman show within a week or 2 weeks and said Iraq is next. They must be behind the anthrax attack and all this nonsense. And Lindsey Graham and them, they're joined at the hip, the two of them. And then, you mentioned Israel there, and the $3.8 billion a year that we give them. And that comes with
38. Is it 38?
No, that deal is for over 10 years.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
Although I'm sure it's much more than 3.8 if you take all the loans and loan guarantees and the military aid and the different things and this and that. And most Americans don't know that over in Israel, they have free college for everybody and free health care for everyone. And then they say, oh, well, we're just giving them military aid. But of course, dollars are fungible, right? That's the American taxpayer paying for socialism in Israel. And, to put an entire population on what in America would be considered the dole. Right? We work for and pay prices, or we wish we could anyway, when it comes to stuff like education and healthcare. But we're picking up their bill on that, so that they can, spend more on their military, etc. So, and then listen, you know what? In 1996, when Osama bin Laden declared war on the United States, I remember reading about that. I was just in high school, or right out of high school, I guess. And I remember reading about that in Newsweek. And I don't remember Israel being a big part of that coverage at all about that. But if you go back and look at Osama bin Laden's declaration of war from 1996, a good portion of it, I don't know, a fifth or something of it, is talking about American support for Israel. And not just American support for Israel's existence, which, in fact, bin Laden absolutely opposed in every way. But his complaint specifically was an American military support for Israel in its occupations of the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, as well as their, at that time, semi-permanent occupation of southern Lebanon, and particularly the operation from the spring of 1996 called Grapes of Wrath, which included what's called the first Condom Massacre, because there was another one in 2006, but it's QANA, Kana. And in 1996, more than 100, I believe it was 108, or no, it was 100 and something women and children, low teens or something, I think 112 or 13 or something, women and children were hiding in a United Nations shelter, and the Israelis bombed it and killed all of them. And Osama bin Laden, in his declaration of war, goes on and on about this. And, obviously he was already declaring war on us, and he was already helping to finance and organize terrorist attacks against the United States. But, the significance of this, I guess what I'm trying to say is, never mind his motives. What's important is that this was part of his speech that he gave. This was part of the essay that he wrote in his declaration of war against the United States. And Mohammed Atta, the lead hijacker of the September 11th plot, the pilot that crashed Flight 11 into the North Tower, if I have my towers and planes right, I'm pretty sure I do, he decided to join Al-Qaeda and attack the United States when he read bin Laden's declaration of war, because he had already, in fact, filled out his last will and testament. He wanted to fight America some way, somehow, because of the Condom Massacre. And so when bin Laden's speech came out saying this is why we have to attack the Americans for supporting what Israel is doing in Lebanon, which no American would have understood. If you tried to explain it to them at all, they would have just, you lost me at Lebanon. We don't even know where that is, most Americans, you know. But for Mohammed Atta, this was everything. When he saw bin Laden go on and on about grapes of wrath and the Condom massacre, that was when he decided to join up. And his buddy Ramzi bin al-Shibh, and he then traveled to Afghanistan to join Al-Qaeda, and did. And then bin Laden and his buddy said, wow, you guys are engineering students in Germany, huh? And you could get right into the United States. And that was, you know, the origin of their role in the September 11th plot that killed 3,000 Americans. But think back on how lucky we are those buildings stood for an hour and a half, right? We could have had 25,000 people killed that day or something like that. And it was over an Egyptian engineering student studying in Germany, upset about what Israel was doing in Lebanon. So we went to Afghanistan to join a plot to knock down towers in New York. Now, that's pretty hard for people to wrap their head around, but then the key is actually pretty obvious, isn't it? Without American support, there'd have never been an Israeli war in Lebanon, not for a day. Without Israeli support, the occupations of the West Bank and Gaza Strip and the endless tyrannical persecution of the Palestinians there, occupied under Israeli rule there, would end. It would end instantly if it wasn't for the United States helping the Israelis inflict this tyranny on those people. And so I'm clearly, I hope, not saying that that is okay. I'm simply saying, look at how mad we get when they kill some of us. Look at how we react when they kill some of us and what our country will do. We're fighting now for 17 years over that one big attack back then. So, as Ron Paul said, if we ignore blowback, we ignore the consequences of our government's actions, and we do that at our own peril. We're letting the Republicans and the Democrats put us, the civilian population they're sworn to protect, in greater danger by allowing them to continue pursuing these policies.
Right, it's a form of treason on the part of these politicians, really.
Yeah, I mean,
and Scott, I remember hearing some of your broadcasts where you eloquently pointed out the action is in the reaction. So what bin Laden was looking for was for the United States. He knew he couldn't defeat the United States in conventional military terms, but he could help incite our politicians to bankrupt us and to overextend the American military and that sort of thing. And that appears, of course, to have been what has happened. And as we look at what's going on in Syria, which is an absolute outrage, and then what's happening in Yemen, that's another thing. I talked about this at the beginning of our meeting. You weren't on then, but the effort now to end United States support for the Saudi genocide against the Yemeni people, and that group, and of course, you know, antiwar.com is involved in this, and Campaign for Liberty, and a lot of and Libertarian Institute, and a lot of groups right, left, and center. And they had that webinar conference, and people are calling up now to 1-8333-STOP-WAR. And when you call on that phone-in system, on that call bank system, it's very sophisticated. You give them your zip code. It will then put you into the U.S. Senate. You can talk to both of your states, United States senators, one at a time, and let them know that you demand that the United States stop supporting the Saudi genocide of the people of Yemen. So that's, of course, a very positive thing that people can do. But perhaps if you'd like to talk a little bit about what's happening in Yemen, and also just the horrible consequences of what's happened in Syria and the great risk that we are at now, because, and I think you've talked about this and others have too, the crazy thing from Turkey, from the air base in Turkey, the Turks are bombing the Kurds that the United States government is supplying, and then all the things that are happening in Yemen. And I'm sorry, that's a lot, but your thoughts, please, sir.
Sure. Well, you know, okay, so here's why we have congressional action on Yemen, because this is one of the wars that is not against Al-Qaeda. This war is for them outright. This is against their enemies, the Houthis, a Shia group from the north of Yemen who are the sworn enemies of Al-Qaeda. So this new bill in the Senate, it's actually unprecedented from the U.S. Senate. They are invoking the War Powers Resolution and saying that Donald Trump does not have the authority to continue waging this war. And Barack Obama started. It's now 3 years on. Operation Decisive Storm, they called it when they launched the war 3 years ago. and they've killed tens of thousands of people. The goals of the war, as stated by the people perpetrating it, are absolutely impossible. The stated mission is to reinstall the former president, Mansour Hadi, to the throne when he has absolutely no political support anywhere in the country whatsoever. And the Saudis have been unable to push into the capital city for the last 3 years, and there's no reason to think that they will be able to. Their allied forces will be able to. So the war is at a complete stalemate, but this is the poorest country, the poorest Arab country. Because, of course, of previous IMF and World Bank gangsterism, not the free market globalization of actual market economics that we favor, but instead the IMF and the...
Hey, you're back.
You all right?
You got it.
Yeah. It seems like the picture's freezing up. You okay?
Yeah.
Should we keep going or not?
Yeah.
Okay. You can hear me okay, you're saying?
No, we're okay.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Your side seems a little screwy. That's why I asked. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, what's happening is so Bernie Sanders and Mike Lee from Utah, who's a Republican, and some others, Rand Paul, the coward, is refusing to support it because he's a terrible person. But anyway, he really is terrible. But anyway, they're passing this thing, and they're saying that Trump, he could invoke the authorization to use force after September 11th for the war against Al-Qaeda in the south of Yemen. But he cannot invoke the AUMF to support this war against the Houthis. There is no legal authority for the war against the Houthis at all. And America is outright participating in it. Our Navy is helping to blockade the country. Our Air Force is helping to refuel Saudi jets in midair. Our government, of course, licenses our companies to continue to supply the Saudis with more and more bombs to drop on these people. We have American mercenaries and intelligence officers and others working with the Saudis to help them pick their targets. And this has been going on for years. And, in the New York Times, this was no undercover reporting or anything. This was an official press release from the Obama government in 2015. It was based on 17 White House sources. It was one of those, right? What they want to put in the Times. And what it said was that they knew that the war against Yemen would be, quote, long, bloody, and indecisive. Long, bloody, and indecisive. But they said, you know what? And indecisive meaning that it could just go on forever. They don't see a way to win it. They don't see a policy that could take shape, that they could have a victory with any set period of time. It's just, we're just going to get into it and see what happens. And then why? Even though they knew that the results would be indeterminate, it was because we had to placate the Saudis. We have to, and really, why would he have to placate them? Because of the Iran nuclear deal. But the Iran nuclear deal secured Saudi Arabia's interests. It made extra double sure that Iran's nuclear program was to remain a civilian nuclear program and could not be used to make weapons to threaten Saudi security. So the real problem is it made them fear that we were going to tilt back toward Iran, and that the nuclear deal heralded the beginning of the end of all this hostility toward Iran by America, and that maybe we would start backing the Iranians like it was back in the 70s and so forth. And so they wanted to help to head that off. And also their new crown prince, at that time was their new deputy crown prince, was 29 years old and basically needed to start a war in a George W. Bush way just to solidify his political position at home. And so the first thing he did was launch this war, and it worked, in fact. He then made himself the crown prince, not the deputy, but now the crown prince, and looks like he's going to, he has an alliance with the Rumsfeld White House for sure, and it looks like he's pushing all his uncles aside and is going to make himself king when his senile old father kicks off here, which will be pretty soon.
Okay, so that's interesting stuff. And of course, real quickly, the outbreaks of cholera, the malnutrition, this is maybe the worst humanitarian situation in the world at the moment, apparently.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. So where the internet cut out, I was talking about how the country, because of the IMF and the World Bank getting them into cash crops and out of growing their own food to eat, then left them helpless once they're under blockade. So they've been under full blockade with American naval support. The Saudis have enforced this blockade for 3 years straight now, cutting them off to all international trade whatsoever. The only people who are allowed to give them food at all are the international relief organizations, and that's hit or miss. And then the Saudis come in and blow up the cranes at the Hodeidah port on the Red Sea. So even when Red Cross aid ship shows up, it's at least much more difficult to even get the stuff off the boat. And their markets are destroyed from all the violence, literally and figuratively. Their markets are destroyed, and so people are just laying down and dying. They're according to all the international aid organizations, at least tens of thousands of people have died, and millions are going hungry and are constantly what they call on the brink of famine. But it's really bad there. And they had they claimed some numbers that possibly were inflated, but it was still at least hundreds of thousands of people got cholera, and at least a few thousand people have died of it there. Although I talked with a guy from Doctors Without Borders who said that when the rainy season stopped, the cholera got better. It stopped being as bad of an epidemic now. But hundreds of thousands of people were sickened with it, and also diphtheria and this kind of thing. It's the most powerful country in the world's history, really. The USA, just like Somalia across the Red Sea there, picking on the weakest, most defenseless population of peasants that we can find to beat up on. It's just absolutely crazy. And if you listen to a justification for it anywhere, the idea is that, well, the Houthis are backed by Iran. Well, that's not really true. The Iranians, here's a measure of the Iranians' influence. The Iranians told the Houthis to not take the capital city and kick the former government out, because that would provoke a Saudi attack. And the Houthis did it anyway. And people say the Iranians sell them arms, but there are so many guns in Yemen, they make Texas look like, Massachusetts or something. I don't know. Is that a good comparison?
Sure.
They are arms exporters, even in the middle of this war. They got too many AKs. They don't have enough people to shoot them at. They're not dependent on Iranian arms whatsoever. There's no reason to believe that that's true. And all the specific accusations that, we intercepted a ship of Iranian arms headed for Yemen, those were all debunked. Those were all lies. In one case, it was a ship going from Yemen to Somalia to sell guns. In the middle of the war, they had a surplus.
Wow, they're all lies. Imagine that. Scott, this has been excellent. Does anybody else want to come up and ask Scott a question? Okay, we have somebody. Well, come up here. Come on up here and ask Scott a question so he can see you.
I don't know where to start. But
just ask him one simple one direct, simple question, right there.
Dennis.
Hi.
Scott is his name?
Scott.
What about the money that from the Obama administration that was filtered into Iran, which was cash? What happened to all those funds, and how was that accounted for? And was that paid for by U.S. taxpayers?
Yeah. Well, the first part of your question, I actually don't know exactly where all that money went. I'm sure it probably did go to the IRGC and who knows what, which they were using to fight against ISIS in Iraq and to fight against the American-supported al-Qaeda jihadists in Syria. So I'm not so sure that was an inappropriate use of those funds. And actually, it was not American taxpayer money at all. It was money. It was $40 billion that Jimmy Carter had seized during the Iranian Revolution.
Wow.
That they were trying to buy arms from the United States. But when the revolution happened, Jimmy Carter stole the money, and they've been sitting on it this whole time. So all Obama did was give them their own money back.
So Obama looked like the bad guy for giving a so-called terrorist nation all this money they were due in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, honestly, even if it had been taxpayer money, I mean, $40 billion, they waste that before 5 a.m. And in this case, even if it had been our money, to bribe the Iranians to give in to the degree that they did give in to sign that nuclear deal, it would have been worth it. You know, I met a guy the other day who said, yeah, you know, I don't know, this Iran deal, I think they might cheat. I think that it's a bad deal. I don't like this Iran deal. I'm not sure why. And then the answer was he actually didn't know anything about the Iran deal at all. He just thought that like somehow it was bad, and he just heard that so many times, and Donald Rumsfeld said it was the worst deal ever. But here's what the Iran deal did very briefly, is they poured concrete into the core of their heavy water reactor. It will never work again. They have no plutonium path to a bomb whatsoever. Now, they weren't making nuclear bombs anyway, but now they can never produce weapons grade plutonium. They destroyed their own reactor. They also turned off 2/3 of their centrifuges and scaled down their nuclear program, their enrichment to just electricity grade, no weapons grade uranium anywhere. And then they also expanded their inspections far beyond any country in history, so that not only does the IAEA weapons inspectors, not only do they have the right to inspect grounds where there's nuclear material, but they can inspect the mines, and they can inspect the factories where they make the centrifuges. And there's a process, a very legitimate process, over, you know, more than fair from our side, that if our side has any suspicions whatsoever that they're doing something on a military base and getting away with something nuclear in secret, that our side has the right to inspect. And if they have a good reason that they can convince the British and the French and the Germans to agree that there's a good reason to suspect something's going on here, the Iranians have to give in. And if they don't give in, then the sanctions automatically kick back in. And you would have to have new action by America and America's allies to lift them again. So the Iranians broke their spine bending over backwards to accommodate the United States of America on this, when they were never even making nukes in the first place. They already had an inspection regime. They already were guaranteed to not have diverted their nuclear material to military purposes. All Obama did was double, extra, triple lock it down beyond all reason. And in a way that if they ever try to cheat, they'll be busted as hell instantly.
How can we verify all this? The American people are fed a bunch of lies from our media and everyone else. How do we verify what they are doing is valid and legit, and they are doing what they're supposed to be doing as far as the controls on the nuclear, whatever it is, the armaments and all this other stuff?
You got to read antiwar.com to keep up with the good news. It's a totally legitimate question, and I would just say that the history of the International Atomic Energy Agency on this issue is, you know, pretty transparent, and the only parts of it that I've noticed to ever be controversial are when they make unsubstantiated claims that things are worse than they really are. But when the IAEA says that the Iranians, that the IAEA, the agency, the way they put it, the agency has continued to verify the non-diversion of nuclear material in Iran to any military or other special purpose. They say that every few weeks, every 6 weeks or whatever it is. And that has, you know, held up. Even when in the height of the Bush administration accusations against Iran, and the IAEA continued to argue that that was the case. In 2007, finally, the CIA came out and said the IAEA is right. They really aren't making nuclear weapons, and they abandoned all research even into looking into nuclear weapons back in 2003, which I think even those claims are overblown. But still, and there's really there's no evidence, there's no real reason to think that Iran would pursue nuclear weapons, because in fact they could only ever make about probably one, and maybe not even one, before America found out and carpet bombed Tehran, maybe nuked Tehran. I mean, we already have 7,000 H-bombs, and they know that. And you know, Lynn Lyndon Johnson let Mao get nukes because he was like, what am I going to do? Invade China to prevent Mao from getting nukes? I just can't do it, right? But the Americans now, the policy is that they would never allow Iran to get nukes. And if they ever really started making progress on nukes, America would attack them first before they ever let them follow through with it. And I think that they know that, and, you know, consider them credibly deterred. And at the same time, they kind of have a half a deterrent, right? They have the ability to enrich uranium. Now, they've never made weapons-grade uranium, which has to be above 90% pure uranium-235. They've never done that. But they have shown that they can master the fuel cycle. And they have shown that if it really came to that level of conflict with the United States, that they have what you could consider sort of a latent nuclear deterrent, which should be good enough. Because, in fact, if their possession of nuclear technology is our only excuse for war against them, and the only reason they have even half of a nuclear capability is so that we won't attack them, then it seems like we could just be friends now and drop all this crap. You know what I mean? What is this?
But Scott, isn't the answer to the question about the question about the media lying? Isn't the answer to that one? Yes, they have been lying about this, but in the other way, overblowing it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you think about how many times you heard that the Iranians were making nukes. Absolutely. I mean, I used to drive for a living and listen to AM talk radio, and at the top of the hour, on the hour, every hour, 5 days a week, the Iranians are making nuclear bombs. Everybody knows that. Well, that's funny because they never did make a single one. So what's taking so long, right? The whole thing is a hoax. I mean, it is literally a hoax on the level of this. Saddam Hussein has a massive Manhattan project to make nuclear bombs. We can't show you any pictures of it. We have no idea where it might be. Geez, it's an unknown, but just trust us that here in this country the size of California that America had already inspected the hell out of, that we had air superiority over the skies of for a decade straight. We had every satellite in the world, and we were to believe that Saddam was making nukes, but our government couldn't. They knew it, but they couldn't quite prove it. Come on. Right. They're lying.
And the other point, and of course we've had Gareth Porter on previously, the author of The Manufactured Crisis, and I think you have said that your most frequent interview guest is Gareth Porter. So he's debunked all of that, but also, and you and he both pointed out, under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Iran and the United States are both signatories. Each signatory has the inalienable right to a civilian nuclear program. They also have the obligation not to interfere with a fellow signatory's civilian nuclear program. So the United States has been in violation of that non-proliferation treaty, not the Iranians. And then on top of that, there is a nuclear monopolist in the Middle East, as Sheldon Richman says, who is not a signatory to the non-proliferation treaty. And you probably just met with Grant Smith. Didn't he point out that under the Symington-Glenn amendments, the United States is forbidden to give foreign aid to a country with a nuclear program, civilian or otherwise, that hasn't signed the non-proliferation treaty? And then that was watered down to the point, well, if the president issues a waiver, comes out, so I'm going to give a waiver. And I guess they've done it for a couple of countries, like India and Pakistan. Yeah. But the country in the Middle East, they haven't done that for. So it's really a very convoluted system. What the American people hear from the media regarding this is the total opposite of the actual reality of the facts on the ground in the Middle East. Would you believe it? Hard to imagine, but there it is.
Yeah. Well, not to change the subject from Israel, but you brought up India and Pakistan there. How about America looking the other way while the Saudis helped finance and create the Pakistani nuclear weapons program in the 1980s while they were all working together against the Soviet Union and Afghanistan, right? And then at the same time, or no, not at the same time, then later, the Bush administration turns around and helps build up the Indian nuclear program. I guess the Clinton administration actually had gotten a head start on that. And Condoleezza Rice worked very hard to get around and get those waivers so that America could support India's America's nuclear program. And this is, one of the worst potential nuclear war flashpoints on Earth, where India and Pakistan have had 4 wars since they were divided after World War II, and they have this permanent and, I guess mostly low intensity, but from time to time it really flares up, their dispute over this region of Kashmir, which is populated by people that are, really a separate sort of people in a way. I'm not exactly sure their ethnicity, but I think they are sort of, quote, a separate people, the way ethnographers would say. But the Pakistanis seem to have, and I guess they're Muslim, and the Pakistanis seem to have a more legitimate claim to the territory, but it's ruled by the Indians, and the Pakistanis will never give it up, and they've been fighting over it all the time. And that is one of the most likely places on Earth for a nuclear war to break out. And America's policy is just like, hey, you want to buy some uranium? What can we do? Hey, let's do some business, and just make things worse. Right. When, if you think about what America is supposed to be for a minute, rather than waging all of these wars, we'd be doing nothing but hosting peace conferences and trying to get these guys to work something out. Amen. Let's hear some proposals for peace in Kashmir so that we never have a nuclear war between India and Pakistan. As Daniel Ellsberg has said, even a limited war between India and Pakistan could cause nuclear winter and kill billions of people. Absolutely. Because what happens is the smoke could get up into the stratosphere, up far above the rain clouds, to wash it back down again. So it'll just stay suspended up there and, destroy crop cycles all over the planet Earth. When, we have 7.5 billion people now dependent on, normal precipitation and sunlight cycles remaining the way they are. This is the kind of danger that even a limited nuclear war like that could cause. And, just goes to show how completely reckless, narrow-minded, and short-sighted the American policymakers can be.
Well, Scott, you were very patient and very kind, both in sharing all this great information and also waiting for us as our meeting got off a little bit of a late start. Interestingly, our first speaker, Harry Verjeiser, who's a great Austrian economist and has worked with the Mises Institute on things. I think he's got this thing about the 120-year war, this thing he wants to talk to us about in a future meeting, and he did mention, too bad we didn't listen to George Washington, in the farewell address, and no entangling alliances and all that sort of thing. So that dovetails perfectly with what you just brought up. Everybody, a big round of applause for the great Scott Horton. He's a real fount of information, a wealth of knowledge, not politically incorrect, or is politically incorrect, but he's historically accurate and philosophically consistent. Scott, thank you very much. We really appreciate all you do. So everyone, listen to the Scott Horton Show, read antiwar.com, go to the Libertarian Institute and see all the great articles, and help support Scott any way you can. Buy his book, Fool's Errand, listen to his podcast, share the podcast, subscribe, and all that good stuff. Scott, thank you very much, and good night, sir.
Thank you all very much. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Very
kind
of you, Scott.
Thanks. Okay.